the proposals which are being made in this bill. Mr. Speaker, we are a society, a country, which now we should be working hard to ensure that every citizen has got access to free healthcare. We should be working so hard, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that every student, every young kid born from the Bundus of Narok or from the other Bundus of Lake Turkana are able to get access to quality and free education as well as healthcare. Mr. Speaker, what we are doing now by regulating this kind of fundraising is by making sure that we are condemning this generation into poverty. Mr. Speaker, I completely detest that approach. I've sat down there listening to the Chief Whip talking about when he went to school, that he could not have finished school without Harambee. That is very true to all of us. But are we going to stagnate and stay there for the rest of our generation? Or are we going to do things differently? Earlier on, in the morning session, Mr. Speaker, we had the Cabinet Secretary of Housing, Lands and Housing. And she made a statement here and said that Narok County, with 6 sub-counties, will be entitled to a minimum of 220 houses per sub-county. That makes it about 1,320 houses for Narok County. When I stood to inquire further on that, she said that that is just the beginning. Mr. Speaker, I want to invite my colleagues for us to discuss here is how do we make sure that if our funds are being deducted from our salaries, we can guarantee that those who have not been given an opportunity to get to where we are, the state takes that responsibility. When you now require us to profile individuals who are going to be carrying out fundraising activities, Mr. Speaker, the only thing that I conclude is that we are content with being poor, and we are content with widening the gap between the rich and the poor. Mr. Speaker, you cannot say that you will maintain an annual register of persons licensed by it to conduct a public fundraising appeal under this act. You go further and you say that you are now going to have a cabinet secretary who is going to authorize. You go further and you say that in each and every county, Mr. Speaker, you're going to have a CC member who is going to keep a register. I think, Mr. Speaker, we are losing. We are completely losing our trajectory in terms of development in this country. If we were arguing, if the sponsor of this bill was saying, let us now regulate charitable organizations. Let us register charitable organizations that can be able to spell out their mission and goals. We regulate them and allow them to carry out fundraising. In America, where I spent almost 20 years of my life, we had non-profit organizations, we have charitable organizations, but now when it comes here and you're saying you want to be able to profile individuals and keep a list of individuals, I wish we were talking about keeping a list of charitable organizations. I think we need to change, Mr. Speaker. We need to start saying, when did the rain start beating us to a point where now primary schools, we are paying them, when we had made progress, when the late president came into power, where kids could easily go to school for free. Right now, Mr. Speaker, if you ask any of these members who are seated here to show you their phones, there is a Harambee invitation for Harambee to pay for kids to go to school. There is a Harambee for a person to go to hospital. And then, Mr. Speaker, in this bill, it talks about, which I really detest completely. It says, this is an act of parliament to provide a framework for regulations in the conduct of public fundraising appeals to promote transparency and accountability in carrying out of fundraising appeals and foster great philanthropy. How do you foster great philanthropy when everybody in this country knows that the only people who can come up with money are politicians? Aren't you just encouraging corruption then? Aren't you encouraging an issue where you are elected into office because of how much you can be able to give instead of meritocracy? I think we need to focus on developing this nation. We need to come up with policies that will ensure that we narrow this gap between the rich and the poor, those who have and those who have none. We made progress by introducing a new constitution, where now we have counties. You know, even the way we make legislation, Mr. Speaker, has got to change now completely. It has got to change. I long for the time that we will be sitting here and saying, in Tana River County, the residents of that county have decided that every child in that county will go to school for free, and that the money that they are being taxed will be able to be directed there. But now, if we are even regulating fundraising, and then in this same law you say you are excluding, I like what my good friend Bonnie Halwale said, we are excluding family fundraising activities. You know, I mean, seriously. I want to beseech all of us that we move away from this kind of legislation. We are over-legislating. I want to beseech all of us that we sit down and say, how are we going to make sure that we develop policies that will ensure that in future, a granddaughter of the majority whip or majority leader will be able to go to school and not having to worry about harambes. You know? Yes. You know, this issue of majority leader, for us keep on saying harambe, 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 is really pushing us back. We were profiled as a less developed country. We went up to now a medium developing country, a developing country. We have now gone to a point where now we are saying there are those developed nations. And when we go to these international conferences, and I'm sure my good brother, the chair of PAC, will tell you that when they went to COP29, our presidents did not even go. So it was just a room full of individuals who have got dreams but cannot be able to implement them. They were just talking about, we want to give Africa $1.3 trillion just because we spent $3 trillion in promoting warfare among countries. It's a talk shop. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to plead with the sponsor of this bill, my good brother, my good friend, the majority leader, to change, to amend everything and say, let us regulate charitable organizations. That is number one. I will support him 100% on that. Number two, let us ensure that we've registered these non-profits such that if they are supported by an entity outside the country, whatever is imported here is not taxed again at the airport. Because you've seen, I'm sure the majority leader has received so many phone calls from NGOs saying, these books were donated to us, but they are now asking us to pay taxes. So, to save this, let us not limit it down to individuals. Let us come up with the proper regulations of charitable organizations. Let us persuade each county to say, what is the biggest problem? Recently, Mr. Speaker, I saw a Gazette notice where the Cabinet Secretary in charge of Foreign Affairs has decided to give immunity to one charitable organization called the Melinda Gates Foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And in the reasoning of giving that immunity, there's one word that caught my attention. This is a charity organization that has been set up to fight poverty. And that is now where we are giving them immunity. But that immunity